Welcome to Reddit Aliens. What disturbing thing did you find out about someone after they died? Not safe for work? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I'm European, and uncle lived in the USA. I did ancestry DNA. A few months later, a girl from Vietnam contacts me claiming to be a cousin. Typically, anyone who contacted me was a fourth or fifth cousin, which basically means nothing. This one is a first cousin. Turns out my uncle, who was married in the USA and had kids, was in the Vietnam War, had a whole other family, and the 3 Vietnamese kids are named after his American kids. Surprise! That my grandmother accidentally killed her younger sister. They were walking back from school, and my grandmother shoved her sister and she fell under a car, which ran her over. My grandma was raped by her father when she was a teenager. This resulted in a pregnancy, and she gave birth to a boy who was sent away to live with some distant aunt and uncle. My grandma went on to get married to my grandpa, and together they had my mom, aunts, and my known uncle. I never knew about this other uncle until I met him as a teenager, and even then, all my mom would say is that he was her half-brother and was adopted as a baby. He always gave me creepy vibes, but I couldn't figure out why. I found out by Googling his name after he died in prison that he was a convicted child molester. I later connected the dots why he was never talked about through overhearing bits of other families' conversation about his origin and life. Not too disturbing per se, but definitely a letdown, and it changed my view about them. I loved and respected my grandma all my life, so when she got sick and passed away, I was really heartbroken. A few years later, I found out me and my sister were her least favorite grandkids because my dad was poor. It made sense to me suddenly. All my cousins would get gold bracelets or nice stuff for special occasions, while I'd get a $20 bill. Whenever my cousins were visiting, Grandma would cook all their favorite food, while me and my sis had to stay away from the dining table till they're done. Basically, we just eat scraps. I just didn't realize all this until my mom pointed it out to me. I guess since I've been treated that way since I was young, I never think of her any differently. Close to 30 years after she passed, I found out my grandmother had a really bad addiction to codeine. When I found out, it totally filled in the blanks of why my dad's relationship with her was the way it was. Rest in peace to both of them. Love them, miss them, wouldn't be who I am without them. That my ex-wife physically and emotionally abused my daughter when I wasn't around. We had a 70-30 custody arrangement, essentially. I had weekends and 2 evenings a week. Didn't find out until months after she died, and kiddo finally had enough therapy to come clean. I had no idea. Grandfather died when I was around 10. I distinctly remember being at his funeral and seeing a group of men there that weren't associated with the rest of my family. I think I remembered this because I watched them pull up in beautiful cars and thought they must be rich and cool, probably around his age at the time too. I wasn't told until I was older, but my grandpa had been involved in some organized crime for most of his life, and most of the time he was traveling in Europe, he was actually in prison. Those men were his partners, and my family hated them. I knew my dad was dating younger women, but after he died, we were sorting through his paperwork and I found out that for the past 7 years, the various women had all been the exact same age as me at the time he was seeing them. How did I find this out? He had a restraining order against one where it listed her birth date. He received correspondence from one who was in prison on child trafficking charges, a Google search of the woman in prison revealed her age, and family members who spoke to the current woman, I managed to successfully avoid them all, relayed her age. About 3 years before he died, he'd sold his house, made $200,000 on the sale, and moved into an apartment. There was an envelope stuffed full of receipts showing he had slowly drained the account by withdrawing between $1,000 and $3,000 in cash over the 3 years since the house sale. He had once drunkenly told me he was in love with a stripper, and through the grapevine I heard the woman he'd been seeing when he died was a prostitute, so I'm assuming that's where all the cash went. No judgment to sex workers, they gotta get paid, but damn, that was not the money management my dad taught me. I was angry, but of course devastated he was gone. I felt like this wasn't the same man who raised me. I went to therapy and that helped, but I don't yearn for my dead father the same way I do my mother. and I think all of the above is a big reason why. My wife died in a car accident while we were trying to reconcile our differences to avoid a divorce. Shortly after she died, I learned that in order to gain favor in the divorce proceedings, she blew her friend, who was a member of the county board because he was close to the judge, who was to preside over our divorce. This really had an effect on my grieving process, you think? My dad passed away from COVID a few months back. My brothers were looking through his mail and saw a child support document. We're all half-brothers, so we each individually asked our moms if our dad owed child support to them. We're all in our late 20s, early 30s. Each one of our moms said no, naturally, so we do some further digging. It turns out that my dad has an autistic son that is 25 years old. Knowing who my dad is, none of us were at all surprised that he had another son. However, all of us were completely shocked to find out that my dad was aware of this kid and didn't tell us. To make matters worse, he grew up down the road from us. My dad had photos stashed away of him, my newly found brother, and his mom. They're photos from the last 25 years. My dad knew since day one. I flew back home for the funeral, and while I was there, we all met our new brother and his mom. I still can't quite process this all. Well, I'm not sure if this counts, but my mom's brother, my uncle, passed away when I was around 3 or 4. But when I got older, she told me that he used to molest her and her other sisters and burned cigarettes on their hands to scare them and to keep them from telling on him. I used to attend these jam sessions at a fellow's house in a nearby town. I thought he was a good guy. After his death, I learned he was a clan leader. I never would have guessed. I found out that my uncle somehow had a black market liver. He went through the first via drinking himself nearly to death. He wouldn't stop drinking and drugging, so the implant folks wouldn't put him on a list. He then takes a trip to, I believe, India and gets a liver implanted. He then found a shady doctor here for aftercare. After that, he drank through another liver in 3 years. He was preparing for another trip to India, but COVID stopped him from traveling. He was anti-vax too. He died not long ago due to his liver not working anymore. From what I'm seeing and what his wife says, I'm 99% sure that liver was harvested from a living donor. My uncle was a hitman. He was awesome, bought me Legos when I was a kid and we'd play fight. He always just seemed really cool when I was young. We'd all go camping and hiking, it was awesome. Well, he disappeared around the time I was 13. Then when I was 26, my dad told me he died. He was apparently on the run and was wanted for years, wanted for several murders. He was a hitman apparently. He was never arrested, but he died in a shooting in Italy. I always had a hard time picturing him in that life. All the memories I have of him were just really cool uncle. He always was really good to me and my siblings. He taught us how to ride a dirt bike, and he was just an all-around great uncle. My old man was born in the 50s, and I was one of 6. When he was 4, his mom gave birth to twins, who then promptly gave them up for adoption through the church. When he was 6, his bio dad split and effed off to Port Elizabeth. He got an abusive asshole of a stepdad who physically abused him and sexually abused his sisters. He ended up with another 6 half-siblings. In the 70s, my dad asked his mom what happened to his bio dad, and he was told he died. Sometime in the late 60s or early 70s. My dad's mother and stepfather died in 1998-99, and we never thought anything about his bio dad until my mother did some digging on Facebook in 2016, trying to find his twin sisters, which no one said existed. My dad has a few memories from his childhood about them, but then they were gone, and no one spoke about them. My mother eventually tracked them down. 2 ladies in their late 60s who only found out in the last few years that they were adopted. One didn't take it well and wanted nothing to do with us. The other was a bit more communicative, and my dad eventually went to visit them. They still chat every now and then. Whilst this was going on, some interesting DNA matches had come up on my family tree thing from my heritage. Turns out, my dad's bio dad had another family in PE, had like another 6 kids, all with the same names as his family in Joburg. My mother got in contact with one of the sons, dad's half-brother, asked him a few questions about his father, who died in 2007, not the 70s like my dad's mother said. Mom eventually told this half-brother what happened, about how his father had another family in Joburg, which he abandoned, and he has 6 half-siblings. All communications ceased then. Mom was instantly blocked. One of the wives of my dad's half-siblings got nosy and started talking to Mom and let her know that the family is in meltdown and in denial over their father, grandfather, and patriarch, who by all accounts was a good Christian man, a pillar of the community, having another family in Joburg, and abandoning his first set of kids. After one of my best friends died, I found out how he became sick. I knew he had HIV. He told me really early in our friendship, but he really avoided that topic since he didn't like to be seen as a sick person or as a burden. He did not ask for help when he needed it, and he ended up having complications and dying because of it. He had the intention to say goodbye to only 4 friends and talk to them before dying. Sadly, he died a couple of days before we met. He already knew he was about to die, but he didn't want to tell me before we saw each other. After he passed away, his brother called me to let me know and to talk about what my friend wanted to tell me. That's where I found out how he got HIV. He had been raped when he was really young, and he did not know he was HIV positive until a couple years later. He never wanted to tell us because of the same reason he never talked about him being sick. He didn't like the idea of being a victim. This broke my heart, and I understood so much about him knowing this. More disgustingly funny, my brother died when I was young, and after he died, we received all his notes and journals from his CO. My other brother read them, and then years later, we were drunk reminiscing about stuff, and he brought up the journals and about how our brother was incredibly detailed about the absolute horribly swamp ass he had when he was in Iraq. Shit still makes me laugh to this day. I never got to read the journals, but I'm sure my parents have them in storage somewhere. My grandfather ran a gas station from the late 40s to the mid-80s. He and my grandmother had 13 kids, 10 surviving, so there was never much money in the house. My mom and her siblings shared beds, hand-me-downs were the rule. The family kept a large garden to feed everyone, etc. I never thought of them as poor growing up, but they really had to scrimp to get by. Anyway, after my grandfather died in the early 2000s, my grandmother learned of a secret bank account he'd kept for decades. It wasn't malicious. He had just always been fearful of dying young, and he wanted to make sure my grandmother would have something to live on in case he actually did die young. When the rest of the family found out, at least a few of my aunts and uncles were pissed because of how financially hard their childhood was. I don't know if it's that disturbing, but it was definitely a shock to our family.